Welcome back to day 286 and 287 of our Bible and reading plan, which you all know are our catch-up days. And so in today's video, we are going to be doing a reflection on Matthew chapter 25, followed by an introduction to the next gospel, the Gospel of Luke. So let's dive into our reflection. And so our reflection comes from day 282, where we read Matthew chapters 25 through 28. And the question says in Matthew 25, Jesus tells the parable of the talents. How are you using the gifts and opportunities God has given you to serve Him and others? So, a brief recap of this parable. So, the parable was of a um, a king he was going away on a trip, so he gave three of his servants some talent, some money to take care of, and so he gave one five, he gave the other two, and then he gave the other one, and he gave this all to them based on their specific ability. And then, so one took the money and put the money to work. The other one took the money and put the money to work. And then the last one that only got the one talent, he took the money and he buried it and hid it. And so when the owner of the property came back, he called his servants to account and asked what they did with the talent. And the one that was given five doubled his and made back 10. The one that was given two doubled his and made back four. The one that was given one, he didn't make anything back. He took the money and hid it and did nothing with it. And so the owner was really upset and angry because he didn't do anything with what he had given him. And so he took the talent from him, gave it to the one earned, that had doubled his and had 10, and then he cast out the other servant into outer darkness where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so this is kind of shows us as believers, the question was, how are you using the gifts and opportunities God has given you? And a lot of us think of gifts as, either being able to sing, being able to dance. We think of those kind of talents. But God has given us so many other talents. You might not be able to sing, but maybe you're really good at administration. Maybe you're really good at organizing. Or maybe you're really good at writing poetry or writing stories. Maybe your talent is you're really good at giving speeches. Maybe your talent is you're a really good athlete. Okay, whatever that talent is, how can you use that talent to glorify God? And that is what God is looking for us to do with the talents and things that He's given us. Even if your talent is cooking, okay, how are you using that gift? Are you using it to serve others? Do you cook meals for other people? Maybe there's a mom, in your church and she just had a baby. Are you using your talent of cooking, and making meals for that mom as a way to help her out? And do you know someone in your church who they just had a family member pass away? And that's going to be really hard. Can you cook them something, provide them something to cook? The same thing. If your talent is organization, and maybe a mom that has a ton of kids, and maybe they need help organizing. Maybe they need help getting their house organized, especially if they're a single mom and they have a lot of kids. They need help. So how are you using your talents? If you have administrative talents, how are you using them? Does the church need an administrator, someone to go in and organize and keep the books, on a volunteer status because the church is small and they can't pay? How are you using your talents? Even if you're not using it for the church, how are you using your talents in the community? Maybe you like to crochet, or maybe you're really good at painting. How are you using what God is giving you in your community to help spread the gospel? You can host a free painting event and have people come out and paint, and just teach them how to paint. Have some gospel music playing, in the background as you're doing what you're doing, and teach them how to paint. And God will open up opportunities through you using your talents to minister to these other people. So what is it that you're talented at? It doesn't have to be something grand. It doesn't have to be something flamboyant. but what is it that you're good at? Are you a good listener? Some people just need people to listen to. And it's hard to find good listeners. So if you are good at listening, become a listener. Be a ear to someone, be an ear to a child that just needs an adult to talk to, someone to confide in, someone that is willing to pray. Are you a prayer? Has God gifted you with the gift of prayer and intercession? How are you using that gift? Are you only using that gift to pray for your family and your family alone? Or are you interceding for your neighbors? Are you interceding for your pastor? How are you using the gifts that God is giving you? Because when it's all said and done, God knows what He's put in each and every one of us. As the parable said, He gave each of them according to their ability. So God already knows what you can do, what level you can do it at, and the level that He can take you to. You just have to be willing to trust Him and use your talents for His good and for His glory. But all right, that is the end of our reflection. Now we're going to jump into our introduction into the book of Luke. And so the book of Luke is written by a physician. He is not one of the disciples, much like Mark, but he is associated with the disciples. And Luke actually wrote two books in the New Testament. He wrote Luke and he wrote Acts. The first part talks about the life of Jesus, which is the gospel. And then in Acts chapter 2, it follows everything that happens. So we have Jesus giving out the Great Commission at the end of Acts. And then it goes on to detail the spread of the early church in the book of Acts. So if you can always read Luke and Acts together because it's two volumes that follow the life and death of Jesus Christ and then the start and the birth of the early church. And so Luke was a co-worker of the Apostle Paul. So he traveled with Paul and he was known with Paul. It is possible that Luke may have been a Gentile convert. So he wasn't a Jewish convert, whereas with Mark and Matthew and Mark, they were both Jewish. And so they believe that Luke might have been a Gentile convert to Christianity. And they believe that his audience was probably to Gentiles and Jews because of the way he wrote his gospel. And the purpose of the gospel of Luke is to strengthen the faith of the early Christians. So the whole purpose of Luke's gospel is to strengthen the faith of the early Christians. Because remember, he is writing to early Christians because he was an associate of Paul. So he wasn't necessarily around when Jesus or even knew Jesus, but he knew Paul and the other apostles. So his job was to encourage the early Christians. They suffered through a lot of persecution and went through a lot of things. And then, unlike Matthew and Mark, Luke starts with the circumstances of the birth of John the Baptist first. And then, so he talks about John the Baptist's birth, and then he goes on to talk about Jesus and Jesus' ministry, his life, death, and resurrection. The other disciples, they mention John the Baptist, but in their gospels, they bring up John while he's already in ministry. Luke is the only one that starts with the conception and birth of John the Baptist and then follows on with Jesus Christ. And it's also really important to remember that all of the gospels were written for a different audience. So Matthew was written to a different audience, same thing with Mark, same thing with Luke. And then when we get to John, John was written for a different audience. And we'll talk about that when we get to the intro to the book of John, but they were all written for different audiences. So as we remember that each book was written for a specific purpose and for a specific audience, we will realize that not all of the stories that were in one gospel are in another gospel. There are some stories that we will see throughout the other gospels that are mentioned, and then there will be some parables, there will be some events that happen in the life of Jesus that aren't mentioned in other ones. And that is perfectly fine because, like I said, all of these gospels were written for a specific audience and a specific purpose. So we need to remember that as we read the gospels. But all right, that is the end of our introduction to the book of Luke and our reflection. I hope that you were encouraged to go and use your talents on today. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so that you can get the notification for day 288 of our Bible in a Year reading plan. All right, everyone, have a blessed day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.